Is hip-hop still the powerful voice of resistance it once was, or has it been transformed into just another tool of control? Today, we're diving into a theory that might completely change how you think about the music you listen to every day. Hip-hop was born in the Bronx, out of the struggles and dreams of marginalized communities.
It's 1973. A young Jamaican-born New Yorker known as DJ Koolherc threw a party in the South Bronx. With a pair of turntables, he improvised a technique that isolated and repeated musical breaks. That technique would lay the foundation for a genre known as hip-hop.
It served as a voice for the voiceless, a raw expression of the harsh realities of inner-city life.
It was police watchers, roll up and try knocking us. One knee I duck, could it be my time is up?
But over the decades, that voice seems to have shifted. Could it be that hip-hop, the genre that once spoke truth to power, has been hijacked and turned into a mechanism for social control? To understand how we got here today, we need to go back, way back. Historically, whenever cultural movements threatened the status quo, governments intervened. During the 60s and 70s, the US government used COINTELPRO to disrupt and dismantle civil rights groups, anti-war movements, and other organizations they deemed radical.
Government watches us, but what about when government surveillance changes the course of history? In the 1960s, the US government started a program called COINTELPRO, or the Counterintelligence Program. The program was a series of secret FBI initiatives targeting activists, political, and minority groups. The American Indian Movement, the Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, women's and civil rights groups, Vietnam War protesters, and anyone who got the government seeing red. Tactics used included infiltration and surveying and discrediting leaders and causes in order to undermine entire movements and organizations. But a lot of what COINTELPRO did was illegal, and it was officially disbanded in 1971. Though if you ask many activist groups and political dissidents, it still exists, just in another form.
In 2012, an anonymous letter surfaced online, claiming a secret meeting took place that suggests similar tactics were being applied to hip-hop. Crazy Bone of Bone Thugs in Harmony reads,
"The secret meeting that changed rap music and destroyed a generation." So it says, hello. After more than 20 years, I finally decided to tell the world what I witnessed in 1991, which I believe was one of the biggest turning points in popular music. So he says, between the late 80s and early 90s, I was what you may call a decision maker with one of the more established companies in the music industry. The industry was different back then, since technology and media weren't accessible to people like they are today. The industry had more control over the public and had the means to influence them any way it wanted.
Right.
This may explain why in early 1991, I was invited to attend a closed-door meeting with a small group of business insiders to discuss rap music's new direction. Rap music's new direction.
Yeah.
Little did I know we would be asked to participate in one of the most unethical and destructive business practices ever seen. The meeting was held at a private residence on the outskirts of Los Angeles. I remember about 25 to 30 people were being there.
Right.
Most of them familiar faces. Speaking of those I knew, we joked about the theme of the meeting, as many of us did not care for rap and failed to see the purpose of being invited to a private meeting to discuss the future of hip-hop.
Talk to him.
Among the attendees was a small group of unfamiliar faces who stayed to themselves and made no attempt to socialize beyond their circle. Based on their behavior and formal appearances, they didn't seem to be from our industry. Our casual chatter was interrupted when we were asked to sign the confidentiality agreement preventing us from publicly discussing the information presented during the meeting. Needless to say, this intrigued, in some cases, disturbed many of us. The agreement was only a page long, but very clear on matters and consequences, which stated that violating the terms would result in job termination immediately. We asked several people what this meeting was about and the reason for such secrecy, but could not find anyone who had the answers for it. A few people refused to sign and walked out. A man who was part of the unfamiliar group collected all the agreements from us. So now it's going to get to the good part because the meeting about to start.
Talk to him, Jake.
It says, quickly after this meeting began, one of the industry colleagues, who shall remain nameless like everybody else, thanked us for attending. He then gave the floor to a man who only introduced himself by first name and gave no other details about his personal background. I think he was the owner of the residence, but that was never confirmed. He briefly praised all of us for the success we had achieved in our industries and congratulated us for being selected as part of this small group of decision makers. At this point, I began to feel slightly uncomfortable and the strangeness of this gathering. The subject quickly changed as the speaker went on to tell us that the respective companies we represented had invested in a very profitable industry, which could become even more rewarding with our active involvement. He explained that the companies we worked for had invested millions into the building of privately owned prisons, and that our positions of influence in the music industry would actually impact profitability of these investments. Then he says, I remember many of us in the group immediately looking at each other in awe and confusion. At the same time, I didn't know what a private prison was, but I wasn't the only one. Sure enough, someone asked what these prisons were and what any of this had to do with music. We were told that these prisons were built by privately owned companies who received funding from the government based on the number of inmates. The more inmates, the more the government would pay these prisons. It was also made clear to us that since these prisons are privately owned, as they become publicly traded, we'd be able to buy shares. Most of us were taken back by this. Again, a couple of people asked what this had to do with us. At this point, my industry colleague who had first opened the meeting took the floor again and answered our questions. He told us that since our employees had become silent investors in this prison business, it was now in their interest to make sure that these prisons remain filled. Our job would be to help make this happen by making music which promote criminal behavior, rap being the music of choice.
Is the same strategy being applied specifically to rap and the hip-hop culture? Imagine the rise of hip-hop in the late 80s and 90s catching the attention of agencies like the CIA, who then sought to exploit the culture for their own purposes. By controlling the gatekeepers of black entertainment and the black music industry, they could steer hip-hop in a direction that served their interests. Interests that included increasing incarceration rates among black and minority communities through private prisons. Evidently it worked, as shown by the noticeable increase in black and minority inmate population from 1980 to 2020. Ice Cube speaks on it.
Same people who own the labels own the prisons.
Literally the same people?
Literally the same people who own the labels own private prisons. You know, it seems really kind of suspicious, if you want to say that word, that the records that come out are really geared to push people towards that prison industry.
It's easy to see in 2024 how hip-hop was used to create a generation of obedient, mindless criminals and consumers for their prisons and products. That's what some would have us become. When those who betrayed the culture were given a seat at the table, they were allowed to flood our neighborhoods with alcohol, selling it at the highest prices. It's clear that their profit comes from exploiting their own people and culture, all to satisfy the demands of their masters, the hidden hand that pulls the strings from behind the scenes. They get paid handsomely for their complicity, while our communities bear the cost. In other words, they use the rap and hip-hop artists we like to influence us. People like Diddy and Jay. Control the players, control the culture, and steer it toward goals that benefit those in power. While rap is a broad genre with diverse sounds and themes, trap is a specific subgenre with a distinct, darker sound. It emerged in the early 2000s in the southern United States, particularly in Atlanta, characterized by heavy 808 drums, sharp hi-hats, and deep bass lines. Trap music's gritty sound and lyrics often focus on the harsh realities of life: drug dealing, violence, poverty, and the struggle for survival, while also glorifying wealth and power. Over time, trap has become the dominant sound in hip-hop, but it's not just the beats that are concerning, it's the message. Could it be that this specific combination of sound and content is designed to keep listeners in a state of fear, anger, and violence, or trapped in cycles of lust, envy, and jealousy? Let's break this down. Music isn't just entertainment, it's a powerful tool that influences emotions and behavior. Research shows that certain beats and frequencies can evoke specific feelings: joy, sadness, or even anger. Let's examine how music production has shifted. Navi B explains.
First, we need to rewind and think about how we got here. In the early days of hip-hop, it seemed like the sound of the genre would get reinvented every few years. Whether it was the stabby, aggressive production of early Dr. Dre, the jazzy, low-end production of Q-Tip, the rough, disorienting production of RZA, the pop influence of the Hitmen, the southern blues influence of Organized Noise, the Casio sound of Swiss Beats, the sped-up soul from Kanye West, the percussive rhythmic beats by Pharrell. Every few years, the sound of hip-hop would change. For the most part, we've been stuck with trap-influenced beats for about 5 to 10 years now. The problem is that the system that we have today stops them from creating these great ideas. Let me explain how. In the world of producing, there are a few different systems. The most common system that you might know is the direct system of producing. This is how most producing used to look. You had one producer who made a bunch of beats, and they would play those beats for the artist directly. Think DJ Premier or Pete Rock making beats for a Nas album. You also had the group system. This is when you had a bunch of producers in a room together and they would make beats together for artists. Think Organized Noise making beats for Outkast. And you had the director system. This is when you had one or many producers working under the umbrella of one main producer. And that main producer selects which beats to use while maybe making some changes to the beats to fit a specific style. Think Timbaland in his later years with Justin Timberlake. Now, what is the system that we have now? Today we have the E-collab system, and this is where you're going to start to see the problem. Here's how the E-collab system works. You have one producer who starts by creating a bunch of loops or the core ideas for beats. Then those loops get sent to another producer. That producer chooses which loops they want to use, and they might add another sound on top of that loop. Then those get sent to another producer who might add some drums, and then they get sent to yet another producer, and so on and so on. We have this system where producers work on beats one after another, and many of these producers don't even know or talk to each other while they work on these beats. And that's also what I think is causing this huge problem. Take a look at this example. Here's the tracklist for Illmatic, which is considered one, if not the best hip-hop album of all time. Most songs just have one producer. And here is a tracklist for Jack Harlow's latest album, which is considered one of the blandest hip-hop albums in recent years. Take a look at that track listing. If Schindler had a list this long, World War II would have never happened. So by the time a beat reaches the artist, it's gone through 5 or 6 different producers. This is a system that has never existed before, and it's also what I think is causing this huge problem.
From creating tracks that resonate with the people's hearts and souls to crafting tunes designed to satisfy the cold, calculated demands of algorithms. Now let's talk about the gatekeepers. These are the people who control what music gets promoted and what doesn't. In today's digital age, where streaming platforms dominate the industry, these gatekeepers hold more power than ever before. But who are they? For that, you need to follow the money, the deals, and the benefactor. They are influential and popular, sometimes even artists themselves. They decide which artists get the push and which ones are left in the shadows. They control the narrative, shaping culture in ways we might not even realize. So, what happens when these gatekeepers are influenced or even placed by entities with their own agendas? We see a genre that was once about resistance and truth transformed into something that promotes the very values it once fought against. So, how does all of this tie together? If the government and the industry gatekeepers are controlling what we hear, and if the music we consume is designed to manipulate our emotions, powerful motivators that can drive both consumer behavior and criminal activity, what does that mean for us as a society? It means that hip-hop, once a powerful tool for empowerment and resistance, has been turned into a product, an assembly line of sounds and messages designed to placate and hypnotize the masses, keeping us fighting and killing each other, subdued and distracted from the real issues that affect us all. Is hip-hop being used to influence and control us? From the brands you choose to the way you speak, the evidence points to a strong possibility. Consider the pervasive impact of commercial endorsements in lyrics, the promotion of specific lifestyles, and the subtle shaping of cultural norms. Could it be that the music is not just entertainment, but also a tool for shaping consumer behavior and societal attitudes? The constant reinforcement of certain messages and values in hip-hop might suggest that it's more than just music. It's a powerful force that influences the way we think, act, and even how we define success. But the power still lies with us, the listeners, the fans, the community. We need to support brands and artists who resist these trends, who stay true to the roots of hip-hop, and who use their platforms to uplift rather than degrade. The choice is yours. Will you continue to consume what's fed to you, or will you seek out and support the voices that challenge the status quo? Hip-hop was born out of resistance. It's time to reclaim that spirit. If you agree, hit the like button, subscribe, and let's continue this conversation in the comments below.